Love Boise State Public Radio podcasts? They are free to enjoy, but not free to produce. If you can give, your support helps keep shows like Idaho Matters and Scandalize available to everyone. Donate now at boisestatepublicradio.org.
More Idaho Matters right now from the studios of Boise State Public Radio News. I'm Gemma Caudette. You know, most of us spend a huge part of our lives at work. So what happens when something traumatic happens there? Maybe it's an accident, an assault. Maybe there's a medical emergency. Maybe you've witnessed something disturbing. Maybe you have been treated unjustly in the workplace. Well, we tend to think people will, take a couple of days. Maybe they'll talk with a counselor and then they get back to business as usual. But that is often not how trauma works. So today, we're going to talk about what actually happens to our brains and our bodies after a traumatic event, and why people so often blame themselves even when they did nothing wrong, and what employers and managers and coworkers can do to help rather than make things harder. Our guest today is Dr. Melissa Kramer. She's a trauma treatment director at Idaho Neurophysiology. I want to thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you so much for having me on.
And Dr. Kramer, when we hear the phrase workplace trauma, what does that actually include? I mean, because I think a lot of people might picture, one specific kind of event, but is it broader than that?
It is. I would say that one of the biggest misconceptions is that if somebody isn't physically injured, that there's not trauma for them. We know that if someone is witnessing trauma, narrowly escaping injury, perform CPR, your brain can interpret all of those things as overwhelming threats. And what happens when that occurs for us is that our brain kind of goes into survival mode after that. And people often experience poor sleep, hypervigilance. That means they're on guard and really kind of agitated all the time. They have intrusive memories of what might have happened at the workplace, irritability, difficulty concentrating, even increased muscle tension and pain because their body is feeling that it has to be on guard or on edge all the time. And in that situation, sometimes many people don't initially think they've experienced trauma. They think, oh, that trauma thing happened to somebody else. They might think there's something physically wrong, or they're saying, I'm exhausted, I'm tense, I can't focus. The event itself may be over, but their brain and body are still trying to figure out whether it's safe or not for them.
So if someone experiences, or maybe they witness something traumatic at work, can you talk to us about what's happening in their brain and their body that they may not even realize in that moment?
That's that piece of going on guard and their brain observing or recognizing this as a threat. And so our nervous system then gets really keyed up and has a hard time understanding how to relax itself back down and how to kind of assess for safety around us. And that's when you start experiencing some of those things I just mentioned. So poor sleep, that really increased startle response, hypervigilance, jumpiness, if there's sounds or people approaching, thoughts or memories that are kind of popping into your head when you don't want them to. And they might be about the trauma or some of the thoughts that you're having about self-blame or kind of what happened with the event. And just overall challenge with focus, attention, concentration, increased irritability, and just overall increased kind of tension and pain in the body.
So you just mentioned self-blame. Why is that such a common reaction?
So self-blame is actually one of the most common trauma reactions that we tend to see when people come in. We hear, I should have done more, or I should have seen it coming, or why wasn't me if somebody else is injured or killed in a workplace. And one of the things that happens is psychologically, self-blame tries to help us create an illusion of control. Our brains will say, if I believe I caused it, then maybe I can prevent it from happening again, take additional safety measures, do things like that. The alternative, that terrible things happen sometimes despite everybody doing everything right, is a much harder concept for our brains to accept. And so we get stuck into that shoulda, woulda, coulda role And it becomes hard when the people around us at work might not know what to say or how to respond in those
Hmm.
scenarios. So I tell people all the time when I'm talking to HRs or I'm talking to supervisors, managers don't need to become therapists. It's not my goal in education. But instead of just saying move on or at least you weren't hurt, you've been through something really difficult. How are you doing? A
Mm.
simple validation can go much further than people realize.
Okay, let's dig into this a little bit more because if you are a manager, right? And one of your employees has been through something traumatic, what is like the first conversation you should be having with them?
I would say that just being present and giving the space for them to just be heard and seen. There is no need to dive in right away to an after action report or kind of digging into all of those topics. But what we really want to do is give them the space to say, no pressure to talk, but I'm here.
Mm. What about coworkers in a situation where maybe they have the best of intentions, and I'll put managers in this as well.
Right.
But then they say something that makes the situation worse. I mean, for example, when you have a loved one who passes away, right? And you come back to work and people say something like, well, they're in a better place. Um, Not always helpful, but
No.
I do believe the intentionality is good.
Mhm. So I would say that a lot of times I get the question of like, how do we tell the difference between someone who needs space and someone who needs to be checked on? Right. And I would
Mm,
say most people actually need both. They need space and connection. Again, just like with managers, coworkers don't need to become counselors. But again, remaining present, simple statements. I'm thinking about you. I'm here if you need anything. You brought up one of the ones that's often really challenging for people to hear. They're in a better place or everything happens for a reason. Whether people have a religious background or not, that may not be a uh, helpful experience in that moment. And another
mhm.
thing that I hear from people who I tend to do education with is, well, I didn't really know what to say, so I just didn't say anything at all. And
Mm,
that piece is just as challenging as perhaps a phrase that isn't helpful. So, what we really want to help people look at is like, hey, no pressure to talk. I'm thinking of you. All of those things can make a tremendous difference because it allows the person
mhm.
to share what they need to share on their time without making an expectation of what the conversation would look like or setting any kind of religious or tone of that matter.
What about the idea that I think in our culture in particular, we tend to underestimate how long it really takes to recover from trauma. Um,
Mhm.
so what about then that pressure that I think a lot of people feel to get back to normal, right? Like go back to work. Just get it, that'll make you feel better. That'll make you feel normal. Is that is that a good approach? And if the answer is no, how do managers and coworkers how do they navigate something like that?
So I'd say the answer is yes and no, which probably
Mhm.
just always overcomplicates it. We know that when somebody has been injured in a workplace, getting them back into the workplace can be really helpful. If there's physical injuries, creating the supportive environment of coworkers. But when we're looking at trauma and recovery there's no single timeline. Some people recover very quickly. That may be because they've had a history of learning how to talk about their emotions. They've got some resilience or support in their life that others don't have, and others take longer. So we know, first and foremost, recovery isn't linear. And some people may be doing really well until they return to the work site, especially
Mm,
in this case where we're talking about traumas that do occur in the workplace. They may be
mhm.
doing really well when they're at home, and then they get to the work site again, see the location, or encounter another reminder, and it's more triggering for them. So one of the most helpful things that organizations can do is avoid assuming that the act of returning to work means that somebody has fully recovered. Recovery isn't about just showing up, it's about restoring functioning.
hmm If there's an employer listening today, what is one change that you would suggest that they make that would have the biggest impact on an employee who is recovering from some type of workplace trauma?
I would say if there's one thing I'd wish that employers would understand, it's treating psychological injuries with the same seriousness that they treat physical injuries. If someone
Mm,
broke their leg, we wouldn't expect them to be at full strength simply because they're back in the building. Psychological recovery deserves the same patience, evidence-based care, and individualized support that we would look at to a physical injury. And also, I want people to realize EAP is an important resource in all of this. I don't want people to think, well, now I can't give them this resource that my company has. It's an
mhm.
important resource, but it shouldn't be the entire response. We want people to know that there's options. EAP is usually more of a 4 to 6 week short-term solution focused therapy approach, which isn't the same thing as an evidence-based psychotherapy that's designed specifically for trauma and people who have experienced trauma and have got to the point where they're diagnosed with PTSD. We want employers to remember that it's important that employees feel psychologically safe to return to work. That means
Mm,
supervisor support, coworker support, reasonable flexibility when it comes to perhaps telework or, changing workstation location or things like that. Understanding that concentration, sleep, and confidence may be affected for a while.
Well, I want to thank you so very much for coming in and talking to us about this topic. We've been speaking with Dr. Melissa Kramer. She is Trauma Treatment Director at Idaho Neuropsychology, and we've been talking about workplace trauma. And that'll do it for this episode of Idaho Matters. Make sure you check out our podcast feed because you can find more episodes of topics that might be interesting to you. And for more local news and headlines, make sure you subscribe to the Connector podcast. Are you subscribed to this Idaho Matters podcast yet? Make sure you're following so you never miss an episode.
Each story you hear on Planet Money starts with a question. What happens if we refund tariffs? Why are groceries so expensive? At NPR, we stand for your right to be curious because the forces shaping our world can be hard to see. Follow NPR's Planet Money wherever you get your podcasts and start seeing how the economy really works.